When you're looking for information, especially specialized information, where else better to go to than the source? That's what our next guest, Chris Torres and Mike Carter, do with the Fantasy Baseball Beat podcast. Coming up next on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy podcast brought to you by So Rare and by Prize Picks. Jeff Erickson here. I'm here with Chris Torres and Mike Carter from the Fantasy Baseball Beat podcast, part of the Triple Play Podcast Network there. Gentlemen, so happy to have you aboard. How you doing?
Doing good. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for having us on. It was kind of surreal. Like, I've listened to the RotoWire pod so much, and it's like me being introduced and then hearing the music and then me coming on. I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. So
yeah. Well, hey, you guys do good work. You wanted to get some feedback on your pod the other day. I was like, yeah, well, give it a good listen. You had Thomas Harding on. He's great. And I just like the idea of you guys having a beat writer on from a various market, whether it's Thomas or, various others. I'll start with you, Chris. How did you guys come up with the idea for this podcast?
Yeah, so we were approached by David Mendelson. This was back about a year and a half ago now. And he wanted to start a new podcast on Triple Play. And he came to me, Mike, and at the time, Carlos Marcano of Baseball Prospectus. And he's like, I think you guys would be great together, and you guys just come up with whatever you want to do. And we talked about it a little bit. And we thought that this kind of provided, this idea of bringing beat writers on. It brought kind of a unique angle that no one else was really doing at the time. So, the premise of it is we interview beat writers and insiders, and we try to ask some questions through a fantasy focused lens. Right. We recognize that beat writers don't have all the answers, right? But we do believe that they provide some really good information. And, it's just one more piece of information that we hope anybody who listens can incorporate into their decision making and hopefully make them a more successful fantasy player. We also do our own analysis. Mike writes over at Fantrax, been writing about bullpens for quite a while now. So we do have a lot of discussion around bullpens because that is his area of expertise. Right. And then we also, something that's unique about our podcast, and it's kind of very uniquely us, is that we take usually like the last 5 or 10 minutes of the show, and we have what's called our mental health minute. Right. And we share with the audience something that me and Mike are doing to try to stay well, to stay on track mentally and physically. And, that's a little different, but it's, again, something that's very important to us. We both work in the field of mental health, and I'm a licensed therapist. Mike is principal at a therapeutic day school. So it's something that we're very passionate about and feel that we could provide something that's beneficial to others beyond just fantasy baseball knowledge. And my hope is that someone walks away from our podcast feeling they really got something out of it, that there was a return on the investment of their time. So we're working hard. You could follow us on Twitter too at fantasy, the letter B, beat, and keep updated on when we're going to be dropping some new episodes.
Yeah, awesome. And Mike, how well did you guys know each other before this podcast started?
Not very well at all. I kind of knew when David approached me, I thought, wow, this is a really great idea. I've known Carlos for a while going back. And when I met Chris, boy, I thought this is a really, really bright guy, incredibly sarcastic with the New York edge. I'm the more subtle Midwesterner comic relief type of guy. Chris is a way better fantasy player than me. I say that all the time whenever I get an opportunity to do so. But Chris and I didn't really know each other before we started working together. And I'm quite a bit older than Chris. And so I never thought of myself as being anyone that would be on a podcast. I'm happy to guest when I get an opportunity to do so. But hosting one is a totally different ballgame, as you know better than just about anyone. You're hosting several during the course of a week. And so we got together and started working on it. And I think we gelled, I would say, pretty much right away, Chris. I mean, I think we have really similar outlooks about a lot of different things, even though we have different opinions about stuff. And it's just been a pleasure working with him. I mean, Chris is just one of the best guys that I know. I go to him for advice, not only on baseball, but for life stuff as well. And being that we kind of both work in the mental health field, we kind of have that kinship of knowing what the other guy's kind of going through a little bit, and that's been really important in my life the last year and a half.
Oh, fantastic. I love hearing that. Let's talk about the central concept of the show. You start off with interviewing a writer or someone who has a beat covering a team or a certain expertise. Like your last one was more injury based with Fantrax's injury expert. But how do you build up your Rolodex? How do you get good guests?
So I am DMing all the time. You know, anybody who has their DMs open, any writer, whether it's at The Athletic, MLB.com, local newspapers. I'm just, I have like a template that I use, and I'll just substitute the name and, the team, and I'm sending it out. And I would say that I've been pretty surprised at how receptive a lot of them have been. Our first guest was actually Craig Mish, who is a friend of the fantasy community, and I thought he'd be a great first guest to start it off, and he was, and he's come on since then. So, people, I would say, it's funny, Mike, like I feel like every time we end a show, we're like, wow, that guy was really nice. Like he was really cool. We're just really surprised at how receptive some of these writers are, and how generous they are with their time. So it's been really cool, but it's just, there's also been a lot of people not responding, and that just comes with the territory. But yeah, we got to keep plugging away here and getting more guests.
Well, I think one of the big things with that too is that, quoting Tom Waits, I have no pride and I have no shame. I have no problem going to a newspaper and finding the beat writer and emailing them directly and saying, hey, look, we have this podcast. We'd love for you to come on and talk about it. And I think one of the big things is we promise kind of no gotcha moments. We script it out. We're really careful about what we ask. I'm not going on there to try to shock and awe anybody. We just really want to get their viewpoint on what's going on. They're very close to the team, and they sometimes have a lot of information that we don't have. The flip side of that, though, is that like when you reach out to Scott Merkin to talk about the White Sox, he's like, well, we have about 8 minutes of a podcast. We don't have much to talk about, right? So the challenge then is kind of working with that and saying, okay, well, how do we elaborate more on that? How do we, exacerbate the podcast from there and really kind of flesh it out a little bit more for the people that are listening? Because we take that really seriously. People that are listening to us, they really are expecting to get a good product on a weekly basis, and we really strive to deliver that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've often reached out to writers for the Sirius XM show. I don't do it as frequently for the podcast because it's longer form. Just for that reason that you cited, is it's sometimes you want to kind of ask the follow-up question. You have all these things you want to talk about, but they're traveling, they have a limited amount of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in season 2, it's particularly challenging. And like last week we had, or this past week's episode, we had a fantasy analyst on in Dave Funnel, and we'll do that. We'll mix it up. We can't get a writer for every episode because we do it weekly, but we try our best. And but yeah, if not, we're trying to get the best guests in the industry. We had Thomas Nastico on, who I hadn't heard before on any podcast, and he puts out so much great content on Twitter. So I was like, we gotta get this guy on. So we're always trying to just give our listeners the best information possible, whether it's from a writer or from a fantasy analyst.
What is the best tip each of you have gotten from a writer about a player that's led you to roster that player to a certain amount of success? Mike, we'll start with you.
Well, we've been good friends with our Kurt Hogg up in Milwaukee, and he really kind of put me on to some guys there that were coming up and moving around. Joey Ortiz being one. Jeff, you were the MC at our Tout Wars draft, and I took Ortiz in the reserve round, and that's looking to be a fairly good move at this point. I don't know how it's going to play out. I mean, it is only May 23rd, but as of right now, that looks like a really good move, and that's the one that comes to mind most recently.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, most recently for me was when we had Chris Cotillo on. He writes for Mass Live about the Red Sox.
Yep.
And he was very adamant that the Red Sox wanted to find playing time for Wilyer Abreu. And I had him on back in March, and I remember, and listen, sometimes like we'll do our analysis after the interview, and we may agree or disagree with certain things that the beat writers said. And I came out and I was like, I think I did this part solo, Mike. I did the fantasy follow-up on myself, and I was like, I don't know if Wilyer Abreu is really a guy that the Red Sox are going to prioritize here. Like I was like, I think there's a new regime there. I don't know if they're going to really like think this guy is someone who deserves playing time. And it turns out that I know there's been the Yoshida injury, but even before then, it seemed like they really wanted to get him in there. And he's been a real boon for fantasy managers so far.
Absolutely. I wish I had him in more leagues. In fact, the week where he started to get a lot of those bids wasn't my priority. A couple other guys were, and I kind of regret that. I only got him in like 112-teamer as opposed to like my main event and a couple other like TGFBI and Scarf. I missed out on those a little bit there, and to my chagrin, because hitting in the middle of a Red Sox lineup, that would be a good thing. I think that's something you want. We're going to talk more about your podcast, and then we'll start talking about some other topics you guys have been discussing. But first, quick note from our friends at So Rare. Have you ever dreamed of stepping into the shoes of a general manager? Welcome to So Rare, MLB, a groundbreaking fantasy baseball game where you call the shots. Take charge and make your managerial mark by collecting officially licensed digital player cards of your favorite MLB stars. These aren't just any cards. They're your ticket to compete for over $1 million in total cash rewards and other amazing prizes. Imagine winning VIP trips to the MLB 2024 All-Star Game or getting your hands on signed merchandise from top MLB players. Here's how it works. Use your cards to set your lineup each game week. Real-world plays like hits, strikeouts, and homers will power your team's performance. Climb the leaderboards and snag weekly wins, from cash prizes to more cards and unforgettable experiences. But there's more. Build an iconic collection of your favorite teams and players to unlock gameplay bonuses and exclusive rewards. The rarer the card, the higher you score, and the bigger your edge in competitions becomes. And when you're ready to trade, the Sorare Marketplace offers a vibrant community of managers. Engage in live auctions, make instant buys, or trade cards peer-to-peer. Starting is absolutely free. Draft your first team of common cards today and feel the thrill of competition as you climb the ranks to baseball mastery. What are you waiting for? Join Sorare MLB today. Transform your passion for baseball into a quest for glory and get rewarded for your baseball savvy. Sign up today with the link in the description and get 50% off your first pro cards up to $50. It's your passion rewarded. Again, big thanks to our friends at So Rare for their sponsorship here. I'm going to post the link in the chat form for those of you who are streaming live with us. You can kind of you can sign up there and see how you can jump in on that there. So it's one way to kind of go ahead and have some fun here. It's their fun new sponsor. I did add Paul Skeens when we first launched this campaign. Didn't get the win today because the Pittsburgh Pirates bullpen is really incompetent right now. But man, he's fun to watch. It's not as many Ks today either, but still, all in all, a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, but he's facing Luis Matos, so that's an audit. You're not getting any keys out of him, so
that's right.
Not too surprised.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little Matos there because hey, on the Thomas Harkin podcast there, Chris, and he responded by having 16 RBI in a week.
Yeah, I would say the timing was pretty good on that. I did. I spoke about him at length in our last episode as someone that people should be picking up. And that was Thursday. We recorded that. And then he went on like this, I think it was 11 RBIs, this explosion over the weekend. So you could just imagine what I was like. I was like that Vince McMahon gif, where he's just like getting all worked up, like progressively more and more. And then he just like falls over in his chair because he just can't believe. Like that was me with Luis Matos this week. I just couldn't believe how well he performed. I know he was a big pickup in Fab this weekend, and to be honest, I think he's going to be worth the investment. In 1 week, he's already moved up to the leadoff spot for the Giants. As we've seen, he's a player that has an elite hit tool, and that was part of his prospect profile, and for sure, he's living up to that. I mean, his in-zone contact rate is basically, it's at 97% so far this season, which is basically like Luis Arias territory.
Right.
In terms of his contact ability. So I think it's safe to say he's going to be a batting average asset, which off the wire, especially in a 15-team league, that's almost impossible to find. At least one that plays every day and doesn't kill you in other categories. And he does have some pop in his bat, as we're seeing. I think we're seeing a conscious effort from him to really tap into his power. His hard hit rate, according to StatCast, is up 15% this season. He's raised his launch angle, and it looks like he's really making a conscious effort to pull the ball in the air, as his pull rate is up near 50%. I heard some concern about like maybe now he's hitting too many fly balls and he doesn't have the raw power for that. But man, if you have a contact rate above 90% and you're pulling a lot of balls in the air, you're going to hit a decent amount of home runs.
Yeah.
So like his 109, it's like around 109 max EV. It indicates his raw power is around average, but listen, I'll take that. That's not like, he's not Miles Straw. He's not Steven Kwan. He's got average pop at least. Look at a guy like Jose Ramirez, never going to blow you away with his StatCast numbers, but his pulled fly ball approach is going to allow him to outperform that. So I think we could see Matos be successful in a similar way. I'm not saying he's Jose Ramirez, but right. I think there is a similarish profile, and add in the fact that he steals bases too. So I really think he's going to be a really big pickup this season for fantasy managers.
And it was the speed is the one thing I'm concerned about, because we haven't seen huge stolen base numbers yet in the minors. But then again, I was like, we've heard about this guy forever, whatever. He's 22.
Right.
It's like, you feel like he's been around for a while. And I get that way with prospects. I get that fatigue. I'm like, that impatience, like, come on, let's go. Oh, he's only 22. Never mind. It's like, it's just, I think when you hear the name bandied about it, we get so hyper conscious of prospects in our keeper leagues or dynasty leagues, and like, okay, enough already. Let's go. Wyatt Langford already is getting called up in less than a year after he gets drafted. And we get these outlandish expectations. All of a sudden, oh wait, this is the normal path. It usually takes a little progression here and there.
And I think we have to remember too that like he was in the minors in rookie ball. This is what had me on him in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
He was 17 years old and had a 171 WRC plus.
Right.
I mean, that's insane. Right. So like just the fact that he showed that ability at that age, I was like, all right, like I thought he was going really overlooked this draft season.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think he's really in for a nice year.
Indeed. Mike, you've been a very busy man lately. You're coaching a lot, and you've had a great run with Batavia High School for your baseball team. How do you manage teaching, coaching, and yet still managing your fantasy teams all at the same time?
Well, the fantasy teams kind of fell by the wayside there for a while, but
okay.
In all honesty, the reason why I'm able to do that is because my wife is incredible, and she allows me to be able to do these things, and knows that it's my passion, and it's the thing that kind of keeps me sane. I've been a special ed teacher for 30 years now, and it's really something that you dedicate your life to. It's a passion that you follow all the way through on, and you have to counterbalance that by being also responsible and understanding that you need to have some type of break from those things. And so with the high school team, what ended up happening was I'd been asked twice before to help out and be an assistant coach, and I had said no both times. And when approached this spring about it, I said to my wife, if I don't do it now, I won't get another opportunity to do it. I'm 50 years old. My body is not in the greatest of condition, as we all know. And if I want to do this, now's the time to really be able to do it. And so I stepped forward and I agreed to do it. My boss and my primary job it was great in accepting that and understanding it was something that I really wanted to do. And, when you're a school principal, you don't work a 40-hour week. You're working 50, 55 hours just about every week. And so we kind of baked that into the idea of what it was that I was doing. And so I got to be the assistant coach to a head coach who's 24. So I'm old enough to be his father. The boys referred to me as Pops throughout most of the year because I'm older and whatnot. But boy, it was a wonderful experience. We ended up winning conference. They were great kids. It was a really nice departure from my day-to-day job. And my wife and my kids, my daughter's 17 and starting to look at colleges. My son is 13, and so he was allowed to be able to do a lot of the stuff with us, coming to practice, coming to games, being exposed to the freshman level and what the expectations are. And so it kind of killed two birds with one stone. I got Jack some experience being around really good ball players, and then I got to help coach that. And so it was a really wonderful experience. I am the type of guy that really needs to be busy. If I'm not busy, I have a tendency to be in trouble. Chris will laugh when I say that, but he knows exactly what I'm talking about. Left to my own devices, I have a T-shirt that my kids made for me that says, "In my defense, I was left unsupervised." I have to have some level of supervision and people being around me to be busy. Otherwise, I have a tendency to kind of fall into my own rut, and I don't want to do that any longer. And so it's really been great. It's a little busier than what I would like probably, but we ended our school year today, and I got a couple of weeks off before we start our summer session, and it's just been wonderful. And Chris really, I can't shout him out enough about it. I mean, the last 2 months, he really carried the pod. He was getting guests. He was lining up the interviews. I was just kind of popping on at the last minute and doing it. So Chris is really, in my opinion, one of the best hosts in this game that we play. He's really, really knowledgeable. He's a really sharp guy. Even though he's a Yankees fan, he's able to put that aside and be rational most of the time. Sometimes no.
Hard to be rational when they're playing so well right now.
That's it's gonna end, and we all know it's gonna stop. I mean, come on now. So, but long story short, I mean, I can't shout him out enough for that. So it's been great.
I'll throw the same thing at Chris. I know you have 2 vocations of your own. You are a nurse, and you also have your own mental health practice as well. How do you manage all of your time?
Well, I'll be honest, working. So my main gig is a remote position. So I'm grateful that I have a lot of flexibility and freedom with that. So that enables, gives me time to do other things as well. So like you mentioned, I do have a private counseling practice, and obviously all this baseball stuff managing. I think I'm at 11 teams this year. Most of them are DCs, but
okay.
But yeah, I try to be very intentional with my time too, and really and we talk about this a lot on the pod. Is just I feel like a lot of times, we're always saying, man, this was a busy week, and I think it really is helpful to just kind of reflect on what we're doing. It's like a checkpoint, basically. Like, okay, what did I do this week to actually take care of myself? Because when you're so busy, it's easy to just get so caught up in that you're neglecting your self-care, right? Like you're not eating right, you're not sleeping enough, you're not moving at all throughout the day. So it's super helpful for us to have that like built into our week. And again, we're hoping that we can pass along some things to others that's helpful for them as well.
Fantastic. I love hearing that there. We're going to talk about some of your work, and we're going to talk about some of the news of the day. But first, we got to take care of a little bit more business. Our friends over at Prize Picks have sponsored us, so let's let them know what they're getting into. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. It's really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. You just pick more or less on 2 player stats and watch the winnings roll in. During the SiriusXM show today, Nick Whalen and I, my co-host, talked about perhaps going in on Obi Toppin for tonight's game 2 against for the Pacers against the Celtics and his points scored projection. You can do more on that. You can do baseball. You can talk about strikeouts. You can talk about total bases. You can do fantasy score. There's lots of different ways. And RotoWire has a picks tool. You can check that out, rotowire.com/picks, to help you do well on that. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code ROTOPOD for the first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Also, we're on the Blue Wire Network. Real quickly, here is their spot. Thank you for your indulgence and patience for those of you streaming live or those of you downloading the podcast later on. Always appreciate you listening. I'm here with the guys from the MLB Beat, the Fantasy Beat podcast. Sorry, guys, on the Triple Play network there. You can follow Mike Carter on Twitter at MDRC0508. You can follow Chris Torres at Torres Takes. And of course, you can check out their podcast as well. I highly recommend it there. It's at Fantasy B Beat Podcast, or click that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you get that locked in. That helps them out a bunch. Please check that out, guys. Not your most recent one, but the one before that was with Thomas Harding from MLB.com covering the Rockies. They're on my screen right now. They just took the lead in the 10th inning against the A's. They blew a lead in this game, and it was Jalen Beeks that blew the save. Wasn't Justin Lawrence. I know you guys are pro Lawrence on this one here, so this is buffering you. Maybe we might even see Lawrence come into this game now that they got the lead in the 10th.
Chris, boy, that's funny. I am a pro Lawrence guy. I know that Thomas came on and talked about Tyler Kinley quite a bit and thought that he would be the guy. I just always feel like the Rockies are waiting on Lawrence to be that guy, and they're going to continue to give him opportunities to do that because why not? They really don't have anybody else that they can really count on at this point. And Beeks is really that guy that's interesting to me that he's getting those opportunities because he's been a guy that's been a long reliever for a period of time and would get those vulture saves every once in a while, like when he was in Tampa, especially, where he'd come in with a 5-3 lead and pitch 3 or 4 innings, and then they'd win 8-3 and he'd get a save. I don't see him being able to hold on to that role long term. I don't know if Chris, if you disagree with that or not, but I know that we've talked about the Rockies situation as one that if you're a serious fantasy player, unless you're completely desperate, you probably want to avoid that situation. Although I will point out that my last pick in Tout Wars this year was Justin Lawrence. And I will admit that, and I will own it.
Never Rockies, man. Like I just cross them off my board. I cross it like the starters, the relievers. I made the mistake with Daniel Bard last year. Like I don't want any part of it. And they're just not good enough. They're not good enough to give you enough opportunities that's worth the headache. So yeah, I'm out on that. I am just tilting a little bit because when you mentioned the game, Jeff, I just pulled up my box score and I was thinking about picking up Ryan Feltner this week. And
that's why you shook your head.
Yeah, like now I was focused for the podcast and now I'm all thrown off. Look at this. Like I missed out. I've got Pablo Lopez in my main event, so my pitching already is taking a beating this week. So I could have really used that Ryan Feltner 6 shutout innings here.
Well, I almost gobbered and then I didn't, and I wish I would have because I would have avoided being verbed. Instead, I would have gotten a really good outing, albeit not a win last night. And in my main event team, we are it's like water in the desert trying to get wins. It's so difficult.
Everybody's going through that right now. Did you see Gomber last night in the dugout pacing back and forth, waiting to go out onto the mound like a caged animal about the 6th inning?
It was
not. Pretty. I was laying on the couch because my family had abandoned me as usual while I was watching the late West Coast games, and he was literally pacing back and forth, and I was like, he's about to get Gombered, and it didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, not enough people bought in yet. We got to wait till he's got a 2 start at San Francisco. And, it's usually at San Francisco. That's where it happened last time. or at Pittsburgh. And you're like, oh yeah, let's Gomber. And no, never Gomber. Never Rockies.
Never
Gomber. I'm so with you on the don't bother with the Rockies closer. And sorry, Mike, don't listen to this. Never White Sox closer either right now.
Oh my God.
Just not going to be doing that right now.
Unless it's Jordan Leisure, I'm not interested in Kopat.
Yeah, I just wash my hands of a lot of them right now. I mean, just not enough saves to go around there. Not enough wins to go around, let alone saves.
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah. So there you go about that. I'm just I'm staying away from that. Mason Miller gave up an unearned run, the stupid runner, as Joe Sheehan likes to call it. The ghost runner scored off of a base hit, so it's an unearned run. I hate that rule at the intensity of 1,000 suns.
Yeah.
It's so bad. Just I first of all, when I go to a ball game, I'm in no hurry to leave. I really noticed all the rule changes when you're there in person. Go to a Dodger game and it's like 2 hours and 10 minutes. That's like two beverages. I mean, like I want time for more. I want to just enjoy the experience a little bit more. Now, I get it. If you're there at the park every day and on TV, it matters. You don't want to have these 4-hour games like the Red Sox and Yankees have all the time. Thanks, ESPN. But I also don't want to be done. I don't go to that many games. If I'm not one of the guys you interview. I'm not a beat writer. I'm a fan when I go to a game, and I want to continue to be a fan.
And they're not adjusting the ticket prices, right?
No,
for a shorter game.
Never,
I went to the Yankee game the other day, and it was like, that was the game that Clay Holmes got blown up.
Yeah,
so it made the game a little bit longer, but like he was on track to be like a 2-hour, 10-minute game, and I'm like, I feel like I just got here. Like, what is it's over?
Yeah.
So exactly. Yeah, it definitely is a problem in that aspect, but. I will say the game attendance does seem to be up, and there does seem to be more interest. So I don't see them changing it. I think they're going to look at that and say, well, this was the reason that we made these games,
We're not the target audience for these.
Exactly.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Like, I care about like every player on the roster basically, and there's always some sort of meaning and all that. I get it. But I understand at the same time. But I think there's some other effects there. It's certainly not boosting offense this year. That was one of the things they tried to claim is, oh, it's going to boost offense. No, it's not doing that. Not this year. The overall stats are down this year.
Yeah, it's been. I'm thinking it's going to pick up here with the weather changing, and I think we're seeing a little bit more offense this past week. But yeah, if you're going to go all in and try to, drum up fan interest and really grow the game, like I think you see it with all other sports, right? You see with basketball, you see with football. Like they know the way to get the casual fan interested is to have offense, right? And it seems like baseball is going in the opposite direction. So I hope that changes around quickly here, because there were some days in like late April in early March where it was just kind of sad, like looking at the box scores and it was just nothing going on.
Well, and you get the same exit velocity and yet not the same results, and that's always frustrating too.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Unless you're playing against the White Sox pitching, in which case you might have 8 or 9 runs before the end of the 3rd inning. So.
Yeah, Michael on Facebook makes a good comment too. He goes, he might change it. However, the pitchers keep going down.
Yeah,
that's true. Now, do we have the exact numbers that they actually are going down? Like they're getting hurt at a greater pace than before. Is it numerically true, or is it just our perception?
No, it really appears to be the perception. I mean, if you really look at the numbers, it's always been a high number of guys that are going down and getting hurt. I think that the perception ends up becoming the reality, as we say in my work, right? Like you have a situation where I think there's more coverage now than there's ever been. So when those things happen, you end up seeing it happen more often, and you feel like it's anecdotally, you feel like it's more, but it's not necessarily more. I think you're just having that situation kind of play itself out that way. And quite honestly, I think we've reached kind of I don't know, Chris and I have talked about this quite a bit, but I think we've sort of reached a plateau with pitching. I mean, we know that they can't throw any harder than what they're doing. And maybe there's a way that we kind of come back down. The Red Sox and Andrew Bailey seem to have kind of uncovered this new reality of, not throwing fastballs and looking at other ways of getting guys out. Maybe the knee jerk is to kind of go back to the ideas of the Mark Burleys and hey, I don't throw very hard, but I know exactly where I'm going to put the ball and I'm going to get you out. I don't know. It's interesting. I see at the high school level, we still see guys that throw 87, 88, sometimes hit 90 every once in a while, but the velocity is even down there, really, quite honestly, so far from what I've seen.
Well, look at Ranger Suarez. He's having this big breakout year, and he's actually not throwing as hard as he did last year. He's throwing 2 miles an hour slower on his average fastball.
Yeah, the Ranger thing, man, I'm kicking myself. I have him nowhere. I didn't see any, there was no.
You were down on him. You were down on him in the winter, Chris.
Yeah, like there was nothing in his profile that made me think there was, he was capable of taking a step forward like this. So just a complete whiff by me. I mean, I guess we could have said he's on a really good team. He's on a good offense, so he's a good, win source. But I don't know, man. That one I totally whiffed on. But Jeff, let me ask you, like, are you now going into next season worried about taking pitchers with this high velocity? Like even let's say Paul Skeens next year. Right.
Sure.
This guy throws harder than anybody, but we just see how everybody who throws or almost everybody that's throwing 97 plus is going down. So like, do you make an adjustment because of that?
I think it's one of those things that is kind of tricky. I think it's a great question. Is there a magic number? Is it 97? Is it 96.5? Where's the line? It'd be one. But the problem with all of this is there's a direct correlation between increased velocity and increased success for most pitchers. There's also that direct correlation between more injuries. So it's like, do you think you can ride it for a year and get lucky? Do you think you can identify those who are going to get hurt? Probably not. I mean, I think baseball has a hard, I think forever has had a hard time trying to identify that. Mark Pryor had perfect mechanics. He was never going to get hurt. Guess what? He got hurt.
He sure did.
Yuri Perez, let's protect him. Let's shut him down so he doesn't get hurt. He got hurt. And you go back 20 years ago, pitchers got hurt. That's what they did. It's still what they do. It's just you start with the whole concept that throwing a baseball is not a natural motion. Throwing a softball underhand is actually more of a natural motion. You don't hear about as nearly as many girls with UCL injuries with like girls softball. You hear
Right.
with boys baseball all the time. Girls sports, you get the torn ACLs for soccer players all the time, the repetitive use injuries. But you don't have that issue, and that's because they have a different motion. Now, if you could, I think sidearm pitchers get hurt less often. But how many pitchers are you convinced to throw sidearm? Not that many. Good luck with that. We haven't seen too many like that there. I always love seeing the Byung Hyun Kims of the world. But then they're
As
like
a Yankee fan, I really enjoyed.
I bet you.
Oh
do.
yes,
I bet you
He's
do.
my favorite pitcher of all time.
I bet. Yeah. November World Series because of him.
For sure.
That's right. However, I mean, it just doesn't happen often. I love watching knuckleball pitchers, but there's one right now, and that's it. That's the list.
Who might be a sneaky pickup for next week at home against Miami? You know what I'm saying?
Boy.
6 strikeouts today.
Yeah. We drafted Waldron. We dropped him. Now he's on our bench for the start in Cincy, which was and he was on our bench. He was a free agent last week, and he obviously pitched well. I'm still going to Waldron a little bit.
Yeah.
But then again, it's funny how sometimes we've had so many pitchers pitch better in tough matchups, and then they do, and then Tanner Bybee's another one of those, which he's going reverse. He's got his own version of a reverse split. It's against good teams that he pitches well.
Yep. So frustrating when that happens.
Chris, I think you said it really nicely the other day on the podcast that we were on, which was your main event team, where you did Soto, Harper, and CJ Abrams to start. I think you're going to see more of that kind of moving forward, and pitchers being devalued just because people don't know what they're getting. I mean, look at how much Pablo Lopez got, exploded up this year, and it's just not really worked out. I mean, I bought into that too. I thought he's the last guy that I would take as a SP1, and it's not really worked out for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's been. I mean, we talked, Jeff, recently about this idea of like making fantasy like our process simpler and not overthinking things. And I took Pablo Lopez in the main event in the second round this year, and I think it was just me trying to be a little too cute. So I'm in the Champions League, the thing that kind of picked up a lot of steam in the off season, where you do the OC, the draft champions and the main event. And I had Zach Wheeler fall. It was, I think, pick 15. No, not 15. I had pick 19 in the main event, and Zach Wheeler fell to that pick. But I had Zach Wheeler in my other draft champions in my Champions League qualifier. So my thought at the time was, well, Zach Wheeler's older. He's dealt with minor things. So I'm like, I don't feel great about having Wheeler on both teams, because if he goes down, I'm screwed. So I'm like, well, Pablo Lopez is pretty much like, he's not maybe as good, but he's pretty damn close. And I just overthought it. And I took Pablo Lopez, and I'm kicking myself now. That really just was not smart. And I think, I've done well, but I think what's gonna I guess elevate my game to where it's gonna be like, where I'm gonna have more success is to not overthink things like that.
Well, yeah. And I think diversification's good when you're a volume player. You talk about best balls all the time. This happens in football more than baseball, I think, where, if you have 50 entries, well, you don't want to have, lockdown percentage of that same guy every time in that spot. Well, that's fine. But I think when you clearly on the top tier, I don't think I diversify for the sake of diversification when you have 3 leagues. It's when you have 30, and I think that's maybe the mistake there, perhaps. I also think too, like, although in your defense, I'm more inclined to diversify at the top than I would be as we go down to round 10, round 15. We all have our guys at that point in time.
Yeah, that was the plan. Like I wanted to get, once we got like past round 10, was to really just get the same guys, because then if it doesn't work out, they get injured, like your team is not sunk. A second round pick, I feel like that is their potential. The potential is there, especially with a pitcher, so but I think in general, just sometimes, actually I'll bring up another player that I know you can relate to, Jeff, Ohtani. I was right with you, man. Like I know you talked a lot about right after draft season, especially with everything that was going on with Ohtani. You passed on him, and you had a much lower. I think you were like, I won't take him to like pick 30 or something like that. And I was like, yeah, I agree. Like, I don't want to deal, the util only thing, and who knows what's going to happen. And I think that was another example of just like us overthinking it, to be honest with you. Like the util only thing, I think we overblow that. Like Ohtani is he's the best, most talented player in baseball. That's it. Like, we don't have to worry about whether he's util or not. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Well, and like I got him like in the main event, I never had a shot. I was drafting 1.1. I guess I did have a shot, but I was always taking Acuna, and
of course, yeah.
I don't feel too bad about that. I'll sleep well at night about that one. But my rank, I'm directing other people to pass on Ohtani, and that's what I feel bad about. I gave wrong advice, and I hate that. It's because it was not just that. It was, it was the concern about the returning from the internal brace surgery. We saw Harper's power drought the first 2 months of the season. Yep. I was concerned about Ohtani about that. And for 8 days, I was right. And then since then, I've been egregiously wrong.
Yes.
But you know what, though? I don't think that that's bad advice.
Yeah.
I think that's actually really good advice to follow, is that you just don't know. We don't know exactly how that's all going to play out. Ohtani is the freak of all freaks, right? Maybe he doesn't play by the same rules that anyone else does, but if you're playing the percentages and if you're playing to win, your advice was really good advice.
Right. And I think sometimes we have to separate that from, the results from the process, but then you have to examine, is there something I was missing to the process there too? And then maybe that would, and I still kind of go back on that because Ohtani had a previous surgery and struggled in that first year back too. So we had a personal history with him too. So there was a lot of reasons, but point is I love him as a player. I love watching him. I get to see him every night out here in LA, and I don't have him anywhere. I have 14 managed leagues plus a bunch of best balls and score sheet leagues and all that. It adds up to over 20. I don't have him in a single league this year, and that's frustrating.
And Jeff, you know why? That's why we interview the beat reporters.
Yeah, sure. Of course. And that you can get good information if they know, if the team is telling, if the player is telling, and if the reporter is telling, and sometimes they give you the good stuff. Sometimes they can't also,
right.
That's the other thing that's frustrating there too.
Yeah, that can be a little bit, you do see that sometimes where you could tell they're being very cautious, about what they say. So, we try to read between the lines. And again, I think the thing that we really try to do is give our own reactions too. And just hoping that people can take that information. And again, just another piece of information to incorporate. So
indeed. Speaking of information to incorporate, I wanted to hit up a couple of topics real quick before we let you guys go. One, Chris, you tweeted about this. Hitter CSW percentage is something we don't talk a whole lot about. And I agree with you. I haven't seen a whole lot of that there. I don't really talk about it that much. So why don't you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so for a long time, I felt that we as a fantasy community were really focused on O-swing as the way to measure plate discipline. And I always felt that it didn't tell everything. Like there were players with great O-swings that weren't good hitters, right? Like I think the most obvious examples to me are Dan Vogelbach, right? Always at the top of that leaderboard, but he was way, way, way too passive.
Right.
Kevin Biggio, another guy, so I think that gets us part of the way there. And then I started really looking, like CSW came out for pitchers, and everybody looks at that now. That's become really popular. And on Fangraphs, they have CSW percentage for hitters. And I just about 2 years ago, I just started looking at that and I'm like, this is here, but I never hear anybody actually talk about it. I listen to a million podcasts. I read all the articles, like nobody's ever said anything about it. And it was just something that I started to incorporate into my own evaluation process for hitters. And I do really feel that it captures swing decisions. It's not perfect. But there's been a lot of talk about swing decisions. So like the Dan Vogelbachs, he's taking like 20-something% called strikes. That's not good. That's not, right. You're not going to get everything you can out of your potential if you're doing that. So I think CSW captures that because his CSW percentage is, I don't have it off of hand, but it was higher than, it didn't look that great, basically.
Right.
Because it was accounting for those called strikes. So what I'm looking for in a hitter is I want a guy who is really like below 25%, because I feel like that really gives you an idea of their batting average upside, because not only are they making contact, but they're also swinging at pitches that are in the zone that they can do damage on.
Right.
So, and that got me on like Marcell Ozuna this year. Like, you would think like a big power hitter like him maybe have a little bit of a higher CSW, and his was really, I remember looking this off season, I was like, wow, this is really good. Jaron Duran, another guy who kind of popped in that. Actually, Ben Tidd asked me today who are a few players that stand out right now. And I look at a guy, like, I looked at the leaderboard, Max Kepler, a guy with good power, but also he's got like a 22% CSW. So he's making contact and he's swinging. He's not taking a bunch of called strikes, right? So Kepler, Jonah Heim also popped for me. And one guy who I'll tell you now, Mike Curlin, if you're listening, don't try to get Otto Lopez from me, because that's who I'm trying to get in Fab. So he's in my main event with me. So, but he was someone who popped in there as well.
Very good. And that's the thing, is like, there's always these new angles, and a lot of the StatCast revolutions help too. Another thing that we're learning this year is bat swing percentage. Bat speed and the various permutations of that. Mike, how much are you incorporating that into your analysis right now?
Well, because I've been so busy, not much.
Okay.
But this summer, I'm actually going to really be doing some of that stuff. Chris is really, Curlin, copy that. He got you, Chris. Very good. No, Chris really kind of gets me going on that stuff and taking a deeper dive into those things. And so with a little bit of time off here in the next couple of weeks, I think that I'm going to be doing a little bit deeper dive into those things and really kind of seeing what's there to parcel out for myself.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I'm not the first to adapt anything. And it's not because I'm against. It's more just, first of all, time. Secondly, just there's a lot to process. And sometimes I'll let others kind of trailblaze and kind of lead the way. And, that's the great thing about our community now. It's massive. There's so many people doing great work. It's not like a little small niche community of 20 people anymore. There's 1,000 people doing it now, 2,000, 3,000. And, it's a lot, I think that it becomes pretty prevalent. All you don't have to do is look at my timeline. I try to follow a ton of people, more than I probably should, but on Twitter, but this because I always stumble upon good ideas when I do that there. Good podcasts, good ideas, good concepts, and, occasional trolling. Kind of have to dodge that every once in a while, but
sure.
But I try not to be out on the streets when it comes to that.
Jeff, I think one of the things that I would like to point out for you, that as a similar age kind of guy to where you are, that you're kind of a guru in all of this. You're very kind and open and welcoming to people. And when I've been at First Pitch Arizona, which Torres you have to get to, by the way.
Yeah, you should. Absolutely.
You were super welcoming and kind, and actually helping push people that were just starting forward. And I can't thank you enough for that. How welcoming you were, and how kind you've been to people like me starting off 3 or 4 years ago and being where we are now. I just really wanted to thank you for that opportunity and being really kind and gracious with your time.
Well, of course. But, and the thing is, I learned from those before me. Greg Ambrosius, Ron Chandler, were entirely welcoming to me when I first came. 1998, I went to labor with Peter Schenke. We went for the first time to an expert league. And here's Greg Ambrosius welcomed me right away. Gene McCaffrey, John Hunt was the one who invited me in the first place. We were the new guys. We were the young guys back then. I was a 20-something. And, hey, come on. I'm glad you guys are doing this. Great work, etc. It helps everybody. When I do well, it means the community usually does well. And I still feel like we can grow our community. I still think there's a large untapped amount of people that subscribe to our stuff, listen to our stuff, and all that. I think there's a lot of things. And I want to find more women podcasters, more women writers.
Yes.
I want to find people from different backgrounds, because I feel like it's still untapped. Baseball especially. I think football is starting to grow a little bit more in a lot of different directions. I feel like baseball has been a little slower to grow in that. And I don't think the fan base is smaller. I think it's just those who are contributing might be a little bit smaller.
Yep. It's a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
I hope so. Anyways, I don't really want to talk about myself anymore, though. So we'll move on from that. But guys, who's your next guest? What's coming up next for you guys?
Well, it looks like we're going to try to have Scott Merkin from the White Sox on next week, which might be an 8-minute podcast.
All good.
No, but we've got a number of people coming up. John Denton for talk about the Cardinals coming up, and we've got Andrea from Girl Scout Report coming on in a couple of weeks as well.
Nice.
We have a lot of really good people coming up, and now that I have a little bit of time to actually plan, I hope to be able to alleviate that suffering for Torres of trying to find guests every week and writing scripts and all of those things. So, Chris, I owe you one, brother. I'll help take care of it the next couple of months.
Oh, good, baby. I emailed Joel Sherman yesterday. So that's like my big get. I want to get like either him or Rosenthal. Like I'm going to work on that. Joel Sherman was like, here in New York. Yeah, I would always read his stuff. He was, I wanted to be Joel Sherman, that tells you how much of a baseball nerd I was growing up. Sure. Like I wanted to be the Yankees beat writer. So would love to have him on, but yeah, just going to keep plugging away and, always a good feeling when they actually respond. So
for sure.
Yeah. Again, the podcast is the Fantasy Baseball Beat. Guys, what's the best way to access that? What days do you usually post?
Right. So if you want to listen to the pod, go to Triple Play Fantasy Baseball.
Okay.
It's a little confusing, but yeah, go to their main page, and there's several different podcasts part of that platform, which I encourage you to check out as well. Mm-hmm. We usually post, it's either Thursday or Friday, depending on our own schedules, but we try to keep it to one of those days just to be consistent. And then again, you could follow us on Twitter. Every time we post a new show, we're at Fantasy B Beat. And I also try to repost articles, and once in a while, just, try to put out helpful information through the account, not just, the most recent episodes. So yeah, check it. We do it weekly. And another thing, we try to keep it a little bit shorter, partially for us because we don't have a ton of time, but, I think also it could be, it's as a listener, someone who listens to a lot of podcasts myself, sometimes just having a nice half an hour and 40-minute podcast, I'm like, oh, I can do this right now. Like
absolutely.
Sometimes those hour to 2 hour podcasts can be like, I just don't have time for it. So we're hoping that we can make it kind of like easily digestible like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Guys, great stuff. Good to get to know you a little bit better, and hopefully we'll see you a little bit more of everybody in person. We'll get you out to First Pitch Arizona, and maybe at Tout Wars in New York as well next spring. So guys, always a pleasure. Thanks for coming on board, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Jeff.
You. All right, that is today's RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast. Coming up tomorrow, as always, we got Todd Zola, Clay Link with 2 starters. Thanks for listening to RotoWire.